Hello and welcome to another episode of Interviews with Experts. I'm Frederick Dunn, and this is The Way to Bee. I recently took a trip down to Austin, Texas for the Texas State Beekeepers Association 2024 conference, where I met Tara Dawn Chapman. Tara is a longtime beekeeper in the Austin area who has just published her handbook for happy beekeeping, titled For the Bees. I purchased a copy, and I quickly learned that Tara, aside from being a trusted source of beekeeping knowledge and practices, also has a very interesting life story. In this interview, we learn about Tara's beginnings and experience working for the CIA in what's now known as the National Clandestine Service, and how she ultimately landed right back in Austin, Texas, where she and a friend started Two Hives Honey as a business. Here's Tara.
Hi, I'm Tara Chapman, and I own Two Hives Honey, which is a honey and beekeeping company in Austin, Texas. And we do a lot of things. We've grown and kind of evolved over the years, but we are beekeepers. All of the honey with our label is from our hives within 20 miles of downtown Austin. But really, where we've grown and where I've grown to love the most about the beekeeping world is the education, and that means not only beekeeping classes, but also agritourism. So we do a lot of agritourism at our honey ranch just east of Austin. We like to bring out folks and put them in a hive or let them do a honey harvest or a honey tasting, all sorts of things. And I have a book out because I really am passionate about teaching new beekeepers.
That is fantastic. So I want to thank you for accepting my invitation to talk here on The Way to Bee. And for those people who are watching and listening, you should know that I don't want you to wreck your car this holiday weekend. So listen, it's on Podbean. You can also Google and you'll find out it's on iHeartRadio and everything else that you listen to. So don't watch the YouTube unless you're in a safe spot. So thanks, Tara, for being here. And we're going to talk about a lot of cool stuff because I'm really excited that I got to meet you at the state conference there for the Texas Beekeepers Association, and you gave a class there. I sat in and listened to the things you had to say. I have to say, I like your style. And I didn't even know right away that you had written this book, which is in the thumbnail. And I like that book a lot. In fact, it's going to be quickly put on my recommended reading list for beginner beekeepers. Is that your target group? Or is it for every level? Who did you write the book for?
It's definitely for beginners, but it feels a little to say it's for everyone. I know that people say it can't be for everyone, but it is certainly for beginners. But I think that the approach, when we get into some of the more advanced topics like splits, for example, like you came to my class on splits, I do think that I teach that and the seasonal aspect of beekeeping in a way that's different than most folks do. And I kind of take the approach of like, I'm going to approach it from it's the difference between teaching a man a fish and giving a man a fish. And so in that sense, I do think that even beekeepers that are several years into their journey will find a lot of value in how I present the topics.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so. I think you do accomplish that. And I have to admit that I did watch your video on the Texas Beekeepers Association YouTube channel a while ago. And I remember you mentioned baby beehives are like cubs, and then a fully grown beehive is like the lion, and you have to be ready for the lion. And I didn't even know that I was going to run into you at the conference. Also, I didn't know even back then that I was going to be invited to come and speak at that conference. So this discussion was pre-planned. So I just want people to know that.
I
So
love that. I
before,
didn't even know that video was up there. So that's
yeah.
great.
Yeah, you're out there. You're searchable. So anyway, let's talk about your background. And I mean, I want to go way back. Did you grow up in Texas?
I did. I'm from a teeny little town in rural West Texas called Smyre. It's a population of 400, so it's very small.
Okay, so define small because I have learned that Texas idea of small is not what we call small. So what's the population of that town?
400. It's
All
real.
right, that's the same as us. We're at
Yeah.
410. We got you beat.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think
Okay.
that I think that it hovers between 4 and 420 on any given day. I joke that when I left, there's like a little time ticker and it like ticks
Yeah,
down as you leave
yeah.
the
I
town. So
love it when a
it's
town is so small that the welcome sign and come again soon are all on the same post. So I think that's
yeah,
great.
it's like a matter of like if you blink, you miss it. The two kind of surrounding, it's near Lubbock when
Okay.
I was in college. So I ended up at Duke University and I was very naive about the world. I'd never really been out of Texas. And people would say, well, where are you from? And I would say, Smyra, Texas, not knowing like, why wouldn't you know where that is? And they would say, where's that? And I would say, outside of Lubbock. And then they would say, where's that? And then I'm like, run out of reference points because that's 5, 6 hours from Dallas. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, very small.
Are we talking dirt roads and cactus, or what's the terrain like?
Yeah, very flat. It's not so far west that you start to get into the mountains, but super flat. Like my granddad would say, in West Texas, at the very bottom of the panhandle, you can see for 100 miles. And if you stand on a tuna can, you can see for 100 more. Very flat, no trees, a lot of cotton. Cotton and cattle is the money out there.
Cotton and cattle. Okay, that's a great point. Do bees work cotton there?
They do.
What do they get out of it?
Um, they do make honey off of cotton. Have you had cotton honey? It's
We have no cotton here, so it would have to be somebody sharing. But I do hear people say, "Oh, the cotton's,
Has
blooming and the
flowers.
bees are all over it," and that crop goes on.
I'm confused by, I know beekeepers move bees onto cotton. It's very dirty. Cotton's very dirty, in terms of like the pesticides used. So
Yikes.
kind of perplexes me. Cotton honey's not my favorite, but yeah, it does exist.
Okay, so Tara said that it's dirty, meaning that there are industrial or agricultural chemicals being used, probably pesticides. So a listener might wonder, how would we find out if a different geographic area has a heavy or a light pesticide load? And I just want to share with listeners that it's
Hmm.
bscape.org. And you can go there, put in the zip code of wherever you want to know, and you can see what the pesticide load is because they have to register those with the Department of Ag. So I'm glad you said that, but that was interesting calling it dirty. So does that mean the honey that would be taken, the nectar that would be taken and turned into honey would maybe be something that we would worry about?
I mean, I'm speaking just from, the hip here, but yes, and more concerning to me would be the health of my bees on
Mhm,
that crop. I mean, for
mhm,
me as a beekeeper, that's my biggest concern is
mhm,
the health and longevity of my colonies. And so I would be concerned about that as a beekeeper.
mhm. Because it would be basically a monocrop, right?
Yeah,
Monoculture that
monoculture
goes on
and
and on.
yeah, and there's the four. I've never been a beekeeper in West Texas. This came to me years after I left that part of the world, but it is a very sparse, sparse with people and sparse with plants. I mean, I remember when we got to North Carolina, this notion that you just have green everywhere was so new to me and my mom. So I'm also a little bit, I would love to meet up with some West Texas panhandle beekeepers and want to know more about how well fed are your bees. And because
Mhm.
a lot of the forage they're going to get is cotton. And again, it's heavily sprayed with pesticides. That
Yeah.
was one of the jobs that I had growing up. You sit on the back of the tractor and move along and you've got your little sprayer and you spray directly on the
No, you're kidding.
crop.
You would think crop dusters would be the choice down there.
Yeah,
You
there's
think
that
so?
too. Yeah.
So, wow. So what about water availability in that part of Texas? It sounds like they would have problems with water.
Yeah, it's real dry. I was just talking about this with someone yesterday because I was saying that I won this fellowship during COVID and I went out to the Sacramento Valley in California and got to meet with all these farmers and beekeepers and got a kind of firsthand look at the water wars, in California. So we were talking about that compared to Texas.
Hmm.
I was saying that I cannot remember a time my entire life, the idea of restriction restrictive water was just what we did.
Mhm.
We knew how much water there was in the tower, and that dictated on how often or if you got to water your lawn, what days you got to water your lawn, what hours you watered your lawn. And that's just been a factor of my entire life. It's just this notion of that there's not enough water, so we have to work around it.
Has that changed from your childhood to now that you're an adult? Are they still as water stressed or
Still, yeah,
okay?
still. And, being in Austin, where, a fair bit west of there in Central Texas, it's the same thing. He, been under drought conditions for years. And it's still those restrictions are still in place in terms of when you can use water and when you're allowed to water your lawn, et cetera.
So talk to me about interest in insects and things like that as a child. Were you at all were you a free range child that was out checking things out or what were you interested in?
Reading, that's what I
Read-
did. I
Give me an
wanted to
example of a book that marks your childhood.
Uh, so my parents were divorced, and my um, father was not around hardly ever. But when he came into town, I had to go with him, and he would take me to his mother's house, and he would leave me and then go do whatever. And I was boring. There was nothing to do there, and I loved to read. And there were all these Lois Lamar Western books.
I know those books. Yeah.
I read a lot of Lois Lamar Western books growing up. I was very young just because there was nothing else to read and I was bored and
Okay,
wasn't
this
my
is
book of choice, but it was my book of access.
okay, I can bounce this off of you. My grandfather in Vermont had all of those books. He was a real academic, but what he did is he picked up one of those books and he showed it to me. And do you know every river, every town, every hill named in these books is real? Is that true? The places that are described, the characters might be fictitious, but the places are real. Is that true or false?
I,
Prove my grandfather true or false right
I'm
now.
going to say your grandfather's true, but I honestly have no idea. When I wasn't forced to go sit at someone's house that I didn't know and I had other options, I've not been perusing those novels anytime recently.
Okay. So
But that's what I
fast
did. I
forward.
wanted to read, and I don't. I went outside like any other kid. We didn't have computers and the screens and the access to stuff we did now. I remember when we got cable in fifth grade, and that was kind of a big deal. But so we were outside all the time, but there wasn't this keen interest in plants or trees or the outdoors. My granddad had a garden, and my Nana would can from the garden. But once I left West Texas, it wasn't like there was this interest there that I would nurture. I went away to school and then I ended up, working for the government for the next decade.
So then, brothers and sisters by yourself,
I have half sisters, and a
half
young.
sisters.
Mhm.
Were you very close with them, or how was your age?
My I'm 7 years younger than my older half sister and 5 years older than my youngest. So we weren't super close in age. So it's
No.
about myself mostly,
Okay.
honestly.
All right. So, what were your extracurricular activities in high school? Did you play in the band? Did you play sports? What'd you
I
do?
did. Yeah. So I went to a really small school. There were 21 in my graduating class. And so it was this kind of thing where if you did something, you did everything. So I was a cheerleader. I played basketball. I ran track, mostly just to stay in shape for basketball. Basketball is what I really cared about. I'm a big basketball fan. Same thing with cross country. And that was all mostly activities that were available to my tiny little town. You had girls had basketball, boys had football, and that was it.
Okay. And then you decided you needed to go to college and you went to Duke. So I'm getting to the big story, by the way. So you go to Duke. What did you major in there, or what was your path?
So I kind of ended up at Duke in a wayward sort of way. I'm a first generation college graduate, and you don't find a lot of folks leaving rural West Texas to go to a school like Duke. But they had done this, they do this program for seventh graders called the Talent Identification Program. And basically, if seventh graders score so high on their aptitude test, like your state aptitude test, they invite you to take the SAT or the ACT with juniors and seniors. So in seventh grade, I did. I scored high. And so I took the ACT. I didn't really understand why. I remember being confused, like, why would you pay money to take a test? That seems like such a weird decision. And at Texas Tech, I had my little number two pencils, and everyone there, all the juniors and seniors were like, I was what, 12 in seventh grade? And they're like, what are you doing here? And I said, I don't know. In my little, very thick accent, I don't know. Duke asked me to come take this test. And I just remember feeling they were like, oh, you must be so smart. And I thought, I must be so smart. And it was this first time of this like awareness that maybe I had this like gift or abilities that maybe uh, put me apart from the rest. So when it came time to apply to college, again, I had no resources. There was no Kaplan. There was no, counsel. I mean, the school counselor didn't know much more than me and my mom knew, frankly. So we typed my application out on a typewriter and sent it off. And I applied to one school, and I applied early because I thought, well, I'll just go to Duke because they made me feel so smart. That's probably a really good place to go. I didn't visit it. And thank goodness I got in because I didn't realize this notion that, maybe I wouldn't get in. I thought, well, I'll just apply and that's where I'll go. So I got there and then immediately was totally overwhelmed by my naivete and just a fish out of water. Like culturally, it was a huge shock for me. The amount of money, it was very different than all my peers. And that extended to summers because most all of them were very well off financially. So this was a time before we paid our interns. So they would do internships and things. And I didn't have that option. I had to work. I waited tables. And so my options always felt very limited because I thought I can't compete against all of these people that are already out of my league anyway. And so I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I just found that my political science classes were the most interesting to me. So I studied political science, and that's how I chose my major. It's just, I found it interesting. And I thought, again, you'll get a sense that I just sort of like move through the world through gut feeling and kind of whim, right? Like I ended up at Duke that way. And then I was like, well, I'll study political science. That seems like I really enjoy that. I'll do that. There's not a lot of thought put into the major. Again, it just exposes how naive I was.
So then was there a faculty member or an upperclassman or someone that might have, made friends with you and taken you aside and kind of said, hey, have you thought about, this path and that path? Who was the most instrumental in your career path once you were at Duke?
Honestly, I didn't really have that. And it's interesting now because I've been back to Duke. I've been back to speak at conferences and things. And now the programs that they have for first generation college students is incredible. You get matched with an older upperclassman, you get matched with a faculty advisor. It's so much more than just it's financial, it's social. There's so many disadvantages that you're at when you come into that world. And they didn't have that back then. And again, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I probably could have sought out someone, but I was just trying to keep my head above water with my studies and to not feel like stupid, frankly, when all my classmates were around and they seemed to know so much about the world and I seemed to know so little.
Mm-hmm. So you spent a lot of your time alone studying? Did you go to study carols or go to the library or what were you doing?
Yeah, I mean, I quickly figured out after freshman year when I'd gone from this student that, I'd never seen a B in my life in high school. Granted, my school was not challenging at all for me, and Duke was very challenging for me. And then I realized that half the battle is just picking the class that like suits you. I would take these classes that were supposed to be like the breezy, easy classes, and they were just massive memorization, right? You don't have to go to class, you just study for the test and memorize everything. And I don't have a great memory, but I learned that I was actually a quite gifted writer. So I stopped taking those classes that were the easy, quote unquote, easy ones, and started taking classes that spoke to my strong suit, which was writing.
Now you mentioned that typewriter. So was that an electric or a manual typewriter?
It was a manual.
Was it? It
It was
wasn't like
my
real
mom
old.
had from high school.
Was it like an Underwood?
I don't know. I don't
Oh,
know.
that's too bad. That would have been
My
fun.
mom had it in a closet, like it was her typewriter from when she was in high school.
So
And
did you take typing? Could you type fast?
I could, yes, I could.
Okay.
I was a beneficiary of, Apple, Mac did a bunch of, that company did a bunch of work to get computers into schools all across the US in the 90s. And I was a product of that effort, in that we had access to computers because of all
Yeah.
that they were sharing.
I would have to say that one of the greatest practical skills you can pick up is touch typing. If you can type fast and you don't have to look at your hands, you are going to breeze through so much. When I see somebody do this,
Oh
like,
my goodness.
or the thumbs, that's just like typing
Yeah.
is cool. Okay, so I want to zip fast forward because this really surprised me. When I picked up your book, and of course, I started looking at it right away. I did not know that you were in the CIA, and it's right in your book, right in the beginning. And I'm just thinking, what? Can she write that down? I mean, because there are, of course, people that have this career path and they write a whole book about it, right? So, I mean, everything, and it's really cool. I think you also refer to it as the clandestine service. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So, yes. So ended up at the being in Austin, where the Culinary Institute of, I have to always clarify.
Correct, because I have a friend that graduated from the CIA. So that sounds
Yeah,
pretty cool
yeah. I
too.
did not
Yeah,
go to culinary school.
right.
Yes, so that was my very first job out of college, and my area of work that this was in 2003. So we're talking about a post 9/11 world where there was huge, huge hiring and huge amounts of money were being funneled to the so-called war on terror at the time. And so I was part of that wave that was brought in, and Pakistan was my area. And I was in and out of Pakistan a fair bit. And the part of the agency that I worked in, was then called the DO, the Directorate of Operations. It's since changed names. It's now called the National Clandestine Service, which is a lot less obtuse than Directorate
I
of
like that.
Operations.
I like that title though, but I want to stop you there. How you must not have known about that career path. So how did you find out? Do they have recruiters? Do they have people that are watching students and like, hey, that's a candidate. We need to talk to her. And then they start kicking off some kind of background screening, but without you even knowing it before they even talk to you. How do they make contact and find out that you're someone they're interested in? And then how do they convince you that that's something you'd like to do?
Yeah, so there's a couple of paths, but my path was I had dated a guy that had interned there one summer. So I was like aware of this as a potential career. He had worked in the DI. That's where all the folks go that like, so the DO or the NCS are the people that are actually out seeking the intelligence, like recruiting people to spy on behalf of the United States. And then there's analysts that bring in the information and like pose the questions to the folks, the operators in the field, to make sure we're getting the right questions answered. So they're the kind of, he worked in the area that's kind of the communicators with Congress, like what questions do we have? And so I knew it was possible. And then my senior year, again, so I was in a position where I didn't have all the experience that my classmates did. I thought no one is going to hire me, because I've waited tables. That's my experience. And they go to all the Ivy Leagues and the tier one schools and they recruit. And so they had a table at the career fair, and the line was very long, as you can imagine. And I'm very impatient, but I'm also very opportunistic. And so I just kind of watched, and they would chat with people as they would come up to the table, and they'd like put their resumes on the table, and there were a couple of different piles. And I mean, based off the conversations I was hearing, I kind of deduced like this is the pile I want to be in. And so I just slipped around the table and I like slid my resume into the pile. And I always say one of two,
Oh, you did? Like the
yeah,
pile they were putting stuff in, so
yes.
you even snuck one over on them? That's
So
impressive.
one of two things happened. They perhaps I was successful, and then they saw my resume. But honestly, again, I come back to I don't know what on my resume would have been interesting to them. One theory is that the resiliency, right? You don't go from Little Smire, Texas to Duke and get out without some level of resiliency, which
Mhm.
really helpful when you do this kind of work. Or they saw it maybe and they're like, that skill set, that's what we need, and they found it and flagged it. But either way, I got kind of a weird, vaguely spooky email from the quote government, and did an interview in a like little hotel off the side of the highway in Durham, North Carolina, and got an initial offer. But to work at the agency, you don't just get a job offer and then you start. You have to, you hold a top secret clearance there. And so there is not only a full background check, but there's also what's called a full scope lifestyle poly. And so you have to be polygraphed. And it may have changed now, but back then you had a full scope polygraph. I actually failed my first polygraph.
What?
Take it again. I was telling the truth, but I was quite a little anxious. You can imagine like how scary that must be. And there was a lot of like good cop, bad cop going on. There were two people and they would come and leave the room. And anyway, failed my first one, took another one, passed that one. They send out investigators to everywhere you've ever lived. So when
I
my
know. And did you warn people? Did the FBI come to your house and actually talk to people?
Not the FBI, but they do have investigators that come out,
Okay.
and they were door knocking in Little
Yeah.
Texas, and
Yeah.
folks were like, "Oh, Tara must be in trouble."
Yeah. Yeah. Did you ever get to see your security file, your background investigation file?
Um, no, you mean like what information they gathered? No, I
Yeah,
did
because they
know
collect like your school photos and put those in
of
the
everything.
file.
Yeah,
And
no, I didn't
it's
see that.
oh man, because sometimes it's stuff you would like to have. It's like,
Well,
can I have that picture?
Well, I was just cleaning out some files last week, and I came across my original SF-86. And an SF-86 is a form that you fill out that basically you list everything you've ever done in your life as the basis for them to go out and start so every address, every, a friend
Yeah.
in every city. And I found that, and I don't know, it was a little bit unsettling to come across this document
Yeah.
years later.
But you want it to be that thorough. This is really interesting. I know we're here to talk about bees, but this is your path to beekeeping because you actually did. Obviously, you cleared all the wickets, your background clearances were good. And then you end up working for this agency for 10 years. And then I noticed that you say you quit. Why did you quit? In other words, what happened? Did you feel like, man, there's more to the world. I need to get in on that. Or I don't like what I'm doing and seeing here, that kind of thing. How did that go?
Yeah, and I worked with the government for 10 years. I left the agency, I think around year 6, and I kind of moved around. I worked for a congressional commission for a while. I worked for a special inspector general, but it was all centered around Afghanistan, Iraq, and Pakistan. So I sort of saw what was happening in those countries, from oversight, from investigations, and from like the intel operations side. But the reason that I originally left the intel community and went over and worked for a congressional commission was so I was spending a lot of time in and out of Pakistan, which was great. I really enjoyed. Back then, they let us live on the economy, meaning now the embassy is kind of pulled into like a pseudo like green zone at the embassy.
Mhm.
All the housing rather is pulled in. But when I was there, I actually had a little guest house and I got to drive to work every day. Um, great story. I actually like got into a car accident with the head of security for President Musharraf at the time, which is a whole other like a
What?
crazy story.
What? Okay.
But was loving it, and was kind of looking for my next. Okay, I was kind of like done in my role, and I was kind of looking at where I wanted to go next, and was looking around. And the thing is that I was going to continue to be deployed to Pakistan, Afghanistan, or Iraq for the next 10 years,
Mhm.
which I didn't have a problem with. But I did want, and little Tara in her early to mid 20s really, was still holding on to this like notion of my West Texas upbringing, that you like get married in your 20s and then you have kids. And I did want that. And that life is very challenging for women in the intel. In general, the divorce rate for people that work in operations is like over 50%, well over 50%. It's something like 80% at the time.
Mhm.
So it's very high. And I was willing to make those sacrifices. But what I was not willing to make those sacrifices for was to go over and sit in station. And I will never understand why they were sending white women in general to those countries where we couldn't actually do our jobs. We had to sit in station and we wrote cables, and the men got to go out and do all the intel, right? Because culturally, you couldn't do anything different. And I
Mhm.
was like, send us to Latin America where we can get some work done. And so I didn't want to stay and continue to not be able to perform the duties that I was trained to do and just sit in station. And I had seen so many women come, before me that were just frustrated with their inability to work. And they were going to keep sending me there for like the next 6 or 7 years. And so I decided I wanted to do something different.
Was did you see that movie about bin Laden and when they found him, um, and there was a woman in I guess it was like an information center, and she had a status board, and she constantly every day she would go and point at that status board because she knew where he was located, and everybody was blowing her off. Is are there we used to call them combat information centers. Is it like that? I mean, did you occupy a space like that where there were all these status boards and all these meetings going on, and if you knew something, you had to wait until they needed what you knew?
No, not necessarily. No, it didn't really
No.
work. Didn't really work that way. No.
Hmm. Dang it. Hollywood lets me down. Okay.
And I
So let's
intentionally don't watch, like, I've never watched Alias. It's just, there's plenty of books that have been written, like you say, by
yeah,
people that work there. They
yeah,
get their books cleared. There's information. People always ask me about the farm. There's plenty of books out there. You can go read them, but it's
yeah.
just easier if I've not seen the movie to be like, I don't know, I haven't seen it.
Now, when you leave, is there some kind of big outbrief where they say you can't talk about and you can
Yes.
talk about this?
Yes, and any like cover you've had, for most people, your cover gets rolled back so that you can actually, like, you have to get your resume approved. And there's a line on my resume. There's not much on there. Though I haven't had to use a resume in a long time since I started the business 10 years ago. But yes, you get that vetted when you leave of what you can include on your resume, what you can say. And for most people, they do roll back cover so that you just don't have this like glaring gap. There are some
Yeah.
people that they can't do that for, but those are few and far in between.
Okay. So that's a lot of fun, actually. I love that you have that background. And then you end up right back in Texas, and you're single because I read this thing in here about when you're a beekeeper and you got a call for a swarm and you're on a date. And I'm just saying this because this is a word to the wise for anybody out there who's single, who's on a date with a beekeeper. Because you get a call to catch a swarm and you thought it was one of your own. So you leave your date, but your date decides not to go with you. So that's the end of him,
That
right?
was it. That is it. I couldn't believe a world in which a man would go on a date with a woman and he clearly was interested in me and what I did. And he didn't offer to come with me. And I thought, what an unadventurous blob.
These guys, he didn't realize that you were a keeper, but I'm fine.
Yeah. And there's this video of like, it's still circulating. I'll have to send it to you.
Oh yeah,
And
you mentioned that in the book.
yeah,
You
there's
were
this
out
video
there
of
because you were in
me,
your
and
date night clothes.
I
Yeah.
was in this like tiny little mini dress and heels, and it was very stupid. I didn't have a veil on. I mean, I do a lot of bee work without gear, but I always cover my face, and I've got these like long hair and these curls, and I'm picking up this wrought iron chair, and those things are heavy. And I'm like forcefully shaking these bees into this box while people are filming, and it's like nighttime. You shouldn't catch a storm at night anyway. It was just so many bad decisions. But yeah, that was the end of that budding relationship. I just thought,
Yeah.
that's not what I need.
Well, I bet he's sorry now.
I
So,
should send him a copy of the book.
but that's quite a leap we made. So you came back. why bees all of a sudden? What was your introduction to it?
Yeah, so I left the agency and I was still working for the government. And the latter job, the latter part of the decade, I was working for a special inspector general. So I was going, Afghanistan was my area. So I was going in and out of Afghanistan. And this was before remote work was a thing, especially for the government.
Mhm.
And I really wanted to return to Texas for a lot of reasons. And so I convinced my agency to let me work part time from Texas. So I was spending 3 weeks out of the month in Austin, a week in DC, and then every 2 months or so, I would go to Afghanistan for 2 weeks to 2 months, depending on what the needs were and what the design of the trip was. And while I was back in Texas, those are very three different wardrobes: DC, Austin, Texas, and Kabul, Afghanistan.
Mhm.
And so when I was in Austin, I just wanted to be super Austin and wanted to do like off the wall things. Austin has this keep Austin weird reputation. And so I wanted to dive fully into Austin when I was there. And there was a beekeeping class on Groupon. People remember Groupon. And I know it's still around because they always call me one to put my classes on Groupon, and it's a hard pass. Don't water down your brand. Though it did work for me. I took the class. And so I remember seeing it and I thought, that is the weirdest thing I've ever heard. Like, I didn't know. This makes me sound so unintelligent now. But I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't, this thought that you could put beehives in your backyard, I guess, and like be a beekeeper. Like, there was a long journey between me and my food, right? I hadn't yet like shortened the distance to learn more about my food. That wasn't the space. That wasn't the era. And so I thought that's so weird. And then I posted it on Facebook and I was like, who wants to take this class with me? And a gal, her name was Gina, that I knew from the coffee shop, said, my grandpa was a beekeeper. I really want to come. So we took this beekeeping class. And I left there and I just could not believe I had lived my 32 years, 30 years of my life and did not know all that was going on in these hives all around me all the time. I just thought it was so fascinating. And so I'm sure any beekeepers listening, you can remember the first time you ever heard about the queen bee and the mating process and how it's all females that do the work and all of that. It's just so fascinating. And I was just blown away. So I started a couple of hives, which is how the company got its name, was those original two hives.
And we should name the website. It's still Two Hives Honey.
It is. My
Okay.
best advice if you want to start a business is do not include a number in your business name forever until the day that you die. You will say,
Yeah,
spell out the two. I'm just going to put it on my gravestone. Spell out the two, she
yeah,
said.
yeah. Two Hives Honey. Okay, so and then now, so what year was that you were starting? You've been in this for quite a while.
Yeah, so that was like 2013, 2012, maybe when I took that first class.
Okay. And then did you join an organization straight away, or did you just loan it, or you took
Oh,
that course, and what happened after that?
I jumped in real ridiculously fast and it's amazing that it worked out. So I took this class. I started these two beehives with this friend. I was so in early. I mean, I just couldn't believe the enjoyment and the joy that this beehive brought me. And so literally like 18 months after that first class, I was still within the same year which I started my beehives. I wanted my dream that I had was I thought I want to start a honey company because I was fascinated how different flowers make different honey. Again, didn't know that. Didn't know that was a thing. Really, honey in my mind was this commodity, right? You see it at the grocery store, it's the same color, same flavor, and whatnot. And so I really wanted to start a honey company and I wanted every neighborhood to have bees so I could have these little neighborhood honeys. So that was the original idea that I wanted to do. And then I thought, well, I think I need to be all in. And I emailed Laura Weaver, one
Yeah,
half of Bee Weaver.
yes.
And I thought, well, I should probably learn a little bit more about bees. I mean, I was like 6 months into my first beehive. And I thought,
Mhm.
oh, I should maybe learn a little bit more before I quit my job. So
Mhm.
I secured a job with her for the spring season, and then I quit my job in January.
See, I did not even know that because the Weavers, Daniel Weaver, who is also at the conference, and
Mm.
I've been writing her since before the date that you're even talking about now. So, because I wanted to be treatment free and I wanted to have their survivor stock and everything else. So, that was the family that I reached out to from here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So, that is really interesting. And then you worked with them. So, tell me a little bit about that learning curve.
I did. Well, so yeah, so I emailed Laura. I was like, "Are you hiring for the spring season?" She said, "Yes, send me your resume." And I like gathering my documents, and I thought, "Oh, what do you put on a resume?" I'd taken one class, and I had this one hive, right, that I'd had. I built my top bar, so on my resume, I wrote like, "I built my top bar," and then I sent her a cover letter with like my deadlifting numbers because I thought they probably want someone to be strong. It's just like silly. But it worked. And so her and Danny called me, and I'll never forget. They called me up to their house because B Weaver's in East Texas in Navasota, but they actually lived in the time in Austin. And they said, "We'd like to hire you, but you have to know this is really hard work." And the year before, they had hired, so I was in my early 30s at this point. They had hired two young men, like early 20s, and the two young men didn't make it out of the first month. They quit. And that, they hire seasonally for bee season because from basically March until, May is when they're making packages and they're breeding, thousands of queens and making nukes. And so they have to bring in extra support. And I remember Laura saying, that really hurt us. You cannot quit. This is really important. If you were in, you were in. And then, of course, it became these two boys, two men, a decade my junior, like couldn't cut it. I'm going to cut it. I'm going to make it. So I would drive every week. I would drive out to Navasota and I would stay there during the week. And then I would come home for 1 or 2 days on the weekend at most. Usually I'd come home for Sunday night and go back. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Um, I'd never been stung by a bee when I showed up. Uh, and all of a sudden, I'm being thrown in a yard where, you've got trucks of bees being brought in and they are angry and we're shaking packages, and bees do not like to be shook into packages, it turns out. And I'll never forget that one of the early first week when I got stung like 15, 16 times in one day. And I was almost hysterical in my bee suit. And I was like, they would get in my veil and I would like grab at the veil. And that's the thing you don't want to do because then more bees get in. I mean, it was really trial by fire. It was really intense. I was away from, you know, I was staying in this little farmhouse that they have on site that have since been they don't use it to house people anymore. It really should be condemned. I mean, I would find like raccoons in the house.
Oh
There's
man.
lizards in my sink. It was really, really tough. And I remember being terrified that the other workers were going to find out. It was almost like a reverse imposter syndrome because yes, I am very blue collar. I grew up with very, very little, but I did go to Duke University, right? Graduated, had this kind of like big time job, at least from the perspective of most folks, and left it to come do this work. And I did not want them to find out because I thought they're going to lose all, because for them, it's not a choice necessarily. Those folks are there because it's the best paying job they can get in that part of the world. So it was very, very intense. But honestly, that trial by fire is really that's what I needed. And I learned an incredible amount in
Mhm.
that 4 months. Enough that when I came back to Austin, they hired me to work there. They had hives back in Central Texas, and they hired me as a consultant to go out and do all that work for them.
And just because some people are also listening, they can't see you, I want people to know you're not a little person. I think you're like, are you 5'10"?
I'm 5'9", 5'9" and a quarter,
Dang
technically.
it, I was so close. So 5'9" anyway, because you look like someone who would be able to pick things up and put things down. Like
Yes.
you are, were you also a college athlete or did you not?
No, I wasn't, but have always been, fit and very into Olympic weightlifting at the time. And so it
Okay.
was definitely like the physicality of it, in that aspect wasn't too challenging for me. Though I'll say, even at the, it gets real hot in East Texas on a day, middle of the day, May, and you're in full gear.
Mhm.
And that could get really intense. Definitely lost a lot of weight that
So you
spring.
think these other guys, you think they quit because of the stinging or the physically demanding environment, the heat? What do you think got them to quit?
I don't know, but it was the hardest job that I've ever had. I mean, both the everyday of the work, just like the activities, um, was really challenging and the heat. And then also like it wasn't the easiest, it was my first time kind of working, again, in college and in high school, I waited tables, I worked as a receptionist.
Mhm.
But when you're working in that line of work, there is a boss and there are your underlings. And I was totally taken aback by how quickly another underling would throw you under the bus if it meant they didn't get in trouble. Like I had this like very naive vision of like after work, we're all gonna like go get a beer and hang out and kick back. And no, it was
Okay,
cutthroat.
okay, I have to know. Give me one example of when you were thrown under the bus by an underling.
I mean, it was just, like if you left a bucket of feed out, if someone left Danny had this huge tank of sugar syrup for high fructose corn syrup, right? That you could just like open the spout and it would pour out. And, if someone left that open, I mean, there was just finger pointing immediately. And I just expected this camaraderie. And it was a really hard environment to come into. Yeah.
So how long did you end up working with the Weaver family?
So I worked in Navasota from like February until like early June through like season when we're shaking packages and making nukes. And I came back to Austin and I worked there for them. And then I would go back and forth, I would go back and help with some package pickups, but pretty quickly my own work took off. And so it was less than a year that I kind of had to step back and focus on Two Hives because we started growing and getting business pretty quickly.
Mhm. So when you started to grow your own business, did you continue to use the Weaver family stock, or what
Mhm.
did you get? What did you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, with beekeepers, the old phrase, you can make more bees or you can make more honey, and you tend to do one or the other. I mean, the weavers certainly sell honey because they have a lot of, but it's almost like a sort of byproduct for them. They happen to get honey. They're not managing their bees in a way to get more honey. They're managing their hives in a way to get more bees. And so I knew after I left that season, I was like, I will never breed bees. I don't want to. I am awful at grafting. I could never get it. I remember, you go and you've got the mating nukes and you have to go and check and make sure they're laying. And, you have to grab the queen with your bare hands and put her in a box. I wasn't so bad at that. But I really struggled with getting the workers in the box. And the number of times that I would squish a queen and I was terrified. I was terrified of Danny finding out and I would like throw her in the bushes. So
What?
I was like, this is, and my queen counts were always so low. Like the catching, like these women that have been doing this for decades, would come
Mhm.
back with like 100 queens and I'd come back with like 20. So
Yeah.
I was like, this is not for me. So I went back to Austin and I knew I wanted to do honey anyway. So I was like, okay, well, I'm never gonna breed bees, shake packages, or do any of that ever again. But then I was like, oh, I'm not gonna have enough honey to make a business anytime soon. Maybe never. Maybe never is definitely the answer. Never is the answer. And so um, I was reading this book at the time called The $100 Startup. And I was just in ingesting all this entrepreneur like
Is that strictly like a business book? It's
it
not.
is.
Okay.
It's a business book. Yeah. And so I was ingesting all this material, and there was a chapter called Get Paid Twice or something like that. Get paid twice was a phrase that was used in the book. And I was very literally thinking, like, okay, if I've got a jar of honey, how do I get paid twice for it? And I was like mulling this over. And then what I realized was I was introduced to this kind of notion of agritourism, and that I thought, okay, I have to work these bees to produce this honey, and this honey's not going to come for another year. And I don't have enough bees to make enough honey. This isn't going to work. And then it occurred to me that a product could be the tour piece, the agritourism piece. So all of my friends that came into Austin, they just wanted to get into bees. And I thought, I bet I can charge for that. So I started doing that. I started cold calling. I would find these groups on Meetup that had like an outdoorsy theme or slant, the hiking group and the entomology group or whatever. And I would email them and I would say, I've got an experience for your group. And I was charging them next to nothing. They would bring their folks over to my house. We'd sit on my back porch. I had my like lawn chairs out, and I would do like a 20 or 30-minute like intro to bee biology, kind of like wow them with all the bee facts. Then we'd suit up and we'd walk across the street because I had my original beehives were across the street in my neighborhood. And my neighbor would let me run these tours, and I would put them in bees for 30 or 40 minutes, and then I would charge for that. And that really took off. And that was a way I could make money long before I had like a physical, tangible product. And that's really where that started.
So then how often would you bring a group in like that? You wouldn't be getting into your hives frequently. So,
Yeah, so I had 6 hives across the street, and I would try to rotate them through that first year. So man, I don't know how many tours I did that first year. I didn't have a booking system. It was literally like every tour was up. Now we've got a booking system. If you want to do a private tour, which we do that for a lot of businesses, you can book that. There's an additional cost to that, but back then everything was manual. And so someone would buy a tour on the website. Like you could like put the item in your cart and they would buy it. And then I would email them and I would say, what day this week works for you? And then I would, had like 2 or 3 people from this group that I would take out, and I would do this little tour, and I would just manually book everything. But that first year I started bees at like 4 or 5 sites. So I was started taking them out to anyone that would let me bring folks to the site, like farms and stuff. I would start bringing folks out and doing tours there. We did tours at our kind of first big tours we started doing, where I actually had a booking system when you could book a date on the website, was at this nonprofit farm called FarmShare. And there was no bathrooms. So my language had to be like, go to the bathroom before you show up,
yeah,
because you
yeah,
can't go for 90 minutes.
yeah. And so if they wanted to, you're still doing this now.
Yeah.
Okay, so people that want to look to book something, they go to twohiveshoney.com.
Yeah, so you can come out, and we kind of
Okay.
expanded our offerings. We have this what we call a beekeeper for a day experience. So it's a 90-minute, a hive tour where you suit up. We do something I came up with called honey harvest parties, where you get to actually, because I found that some people didn't want to get into bees. And so I thought I've got to find activities to meet. I got to have a wider target audience, right?
Mhm.
So we have kind of 3 signature experiences, and we do a lot of B2B. So with the Google, Austin's a huge tech city. And so a lot of these tech companies will come out, and that's their kind of team building outing.
Now, do you partner up with people that have B&Bs and things like that where people can stay, or you're mostly just for people that are already there in Austin?
Yeah, we do get some people that are traveling through, but it's mostly people that are local to Austin that are coming out and doing a tour or whatever.
Mm. Is it seasonal? So is there a time of year when you are not giving tours?
Yeah, so they're only in the spring and then in the fall. We take a break in the summer. Texas has a really long bee season, February all the way through November. But we take a break. We do March through May, and then we do September and October, just because February, November can be a little bit tricky with the weather, it can be a little bit too cold. And then the summer is just brutal. Nobody wants to be in a bee suit in August in Texas,
And
including me.
you provide the bee suits and all of that for them?
We do, yeah.
Okay. So at some point, somebody said, Tara, you need to write this book, which I'm sure took you more than a week. And why, with all the bee books that are out there,
Yeah.
why did you think this is something that you wanted to do? What message did you need to bring that you haven't found in any other bee book?
Yeah. So it was born out of necessity, really. So I have this apprenticeship class that when I was, so I started right around the time that we started doing tours. I also started teaching beekeeping. And I found that that is a gift. I think I'm very gifted. It's a skill set that breaking it down into a way that's easy to digest because super nuanced, right? I think that I'm good at that. And so I started teaching beekeeping, and I was frustrated with someone would come to an intro class and it's 2.5 hours, and I've just felt so dissatisfied with what I can teach in 2.5 hours. I'm like,
Mhm.
wait, I need you to stay here for 6 more days. So I started this apprenticeship program, where basically it is a paid program, and it initially started as 6 full Saturdays over 6 months. So you get the seasonality. So we can kind of start at the beginning and take you all the way through a harvest. And so you get kind of to see all of the aspects of beekeeping. And the text, I wanted a text that my philosophy definitely, I'm not the furthest to the left in terms of like, I'm definitely treatment free. I try to be as natural as possible. I want to mimic what bees do in the wild. But I'm not the furthest to the left. So definitely left of center. I wanted something that kind of spoke to that. And then also I was frustrated with the text fell into one or two categories. You've got the um, super dense, almost like a reference book. Like all the info is there, but
Mhm.
beginners can't. It's not approachable. And then you've got the beautiful book, right? The beautiful photos, but a lot of fluff. And I thought, can we not address the nuance, but also have fun with it? So I was always trying to find a text and I wanted a text to be super biology forward. Like I think where a lot of people go wrong that teach beekeeping is they teach someone how to be a beekeeper. You need to teach someone how to be a bee biologist first, right? You need to understand bee biology, and then the beekeeping becomes so much easier. But to do the opposite, we fail. And so my assistant was like, don't kill me because you've got a lot going on, but I think you should just write the book that you want. And so I started writing. Um, I just thought, well, I'll just write the information that I would want my students to know that month because I saw them once a month. So that's how I got started doing it. And I didn't have a publisher or anywhere. I didn't think the book would go anywhere. I thought, well, I'll just write the text that I want them to understand, and then we'll go from there.
So, well, I have to say that I think you really did a great job with this book, and I think you accomplished the things that you described that were missing from books that you were not happy with. And for people that are listening, it's called For the Bees. It's a handbook for happy beekeeping. And you do cover kind of both sides of even bee management, hive management for those that want Langstroth. You do touch on, because I think you said initially you were a top bar hive person to begin with. So
I
you
did.
address horizontal beekeeping, but of course, you hit the nail on the head. Understanding bees, understanding their biology, what their needs are, and regional issues that relate to your beekeeping are at the core before you even branch out into the hive configuration that you want to work with. You did such a great job explaining availability of equipment, what kind of choices they're going to have. And then you do, of course, get into the fact that you're going to be picking things up that are heavy, or you're going to be in a horizontal configuration where it's much more accessible. And I like the way that you covered that. And I hope that people that are listening today will take a deep look at your book. It's available on Amazon. And where else can they get it? From your website also?
They can, yeah, they can
Or-
get it on our website and then Amazon, and it's available in Canada and the UK on Amazon as well, and local bookstores.
And so, do you have any book signing tours coming up anywhere, either in your area or to other states?
We have a couple coming up in Austin. We have one at the Bee Supply on December 7th. You probably know Blake Shook. That's his
Mhm.
company. And then we have some planned. We don't have a date, but we'll be in Baltimore and in Miami in the spring. So follow Two Hives, spell out the two
Yes,
on
but
social
up it
media
too.
to learn more about
Yeah.
those.
And of course, we'll put links and information down in the description of this video for those who want to just go and click and follow it. And so are your book signing locations and stuff, is there a page on your website that designates where that's going to be?
Yes, yeah. If you go to our website and you go to the events tab, you will see all the events that we have coming up, including book signings.
Okay, so when you're doing your book, the most challenging chapter for you was and why?
The pest and disease chapter.
Mhm.
Um, I struggle with it. I struggle with teaching it as well because it's not a fun topic. It's not fun, but it's a really necessary topic. I think it's tricky because, when I'm talking about splits, I can tell you about all the different ways I'm well versed in that. But with diseases, you know, I've never seen American foul brood. So I can speak to what, the research and what others can, I'm not seeing a lot of these, and there's so many more than we even cover in the chapter. So I think it's a really tricky one to talk about, also because this is where you really get into some philosophical differences between beekeepers, and they want to, if you're with us, if you're not with us, you're against us. And I have a very open philosophy. I hope that comes through in the book, that I have a way that I like to do things, but I think that there's space for a lot of different philosophies and ways. What might be right for my bees may not be right for your bees. And it depends on your goal. And there's all sorts of things that play a role there. So that was really tricky. And so I handled that chapter. I wanted to talk about integrated pest management. So I break that down, the principles of IPM, and we have an image of the triangle there, the integrated pest management triangle. But I do kind of handle that as like, I can't tell you everything that you need to know, but use this as almost like a reference guide so that there's photos, and I kind of broke down, prevention, identification, and treatment options. Treatment used loosely, of course, of what your options were, to just hopefully give people direction, because this whole book could be about pests and disease, right? This
Sure.
whole book could be
Yeah.
about Varroa.
Yeah.
So that was tricky for me.
And you even touched on thermal treatments. Have you ever actually seen that in practice?
I haven't, and you can't even, this is the other tricky thing about writing a book, is that information ages.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. The company that did those is no longer around. They kind of went
Yeah,
out of
they
business during COVID because they couldn't get some chips or something.
well, they were frustrating because they also wouldn't answer any questions. They wouldn't discuss impact on brood, impact on the queen. They wouldn't, they, it was really, it sounded almost too good to be true. So I reached out to a lot of entomologists that I respect, and we wanted to talk about that. And I was just told, I mean, I won't name him, but he was like, if this worked, everybody would do it.
Yeah.
I mean, just because it's chemical free, it's 100% thermal. We stress them to the level that the bees can manage, but the mites can't. And so then they die. But this treatment extends for a very long time. The reason I'm mentioning it right now is because I still get so many questions from people who want to be completely holistic and who doesn't want to be. And then they hear about something like thermal and they think, why aren't we all doing that? Well, because the parameters are not well established. So wait, don't buy one. So that's and that
It was
company
very
stuff.
expensive. You could still
Yeah,
buy it
yeah.
secondhand. And it was also extremely time intensive to
Sure. I
do.
believe the dwell time was like 80 minutes.
Yeah, it's not reasonable for even a sideliner, much less someone like in the commercial world, to do. This is something for a hobbyist that has a couple of hives to do.
Yeah, no, another thing that people frequently associate with Texas and they associate with the Weaver family, they want to know how they're avoiding Africanized genetics or extremely defensive bees, and how frequently do you even encounter those genetics to the point where you have unmanageable bees?
Yeah, this is one that, it's a little bit tricky to talk about because that aggression is such a relative term, right? For like a brand newbie might work a hive that I might work gloveless, and that they feel, it's very relative. And the other thing is that, to call it Africanized or not, I mean, on some sense it's semantics because you can't actually tell by looking at them if they're Africanized. But what really matters is it more than you can handle? And if it's more than you can handle, then you need to take steps to like remedy that. Yeah, there's some hot hives in Texas. I think that, particularly in south of me, you get guys with a lot more stories, but I certainly have seen my fair share of my tolerance for aggression is very high, and I've definitely seen my fair share of bees that just are not workable. You can't have anywhere near, um, or any other person is going to be
Yeah,
is going to be
you couldn't
around.
put them in a residential area, or you
Yeah,
couldn't bring your
no,
tourism group in,
right. Oh
because
no,
they're dangerous. Let's be honest, they're just
they're
dangerous.
dangerous. They're dangerous. They attack more quickly. They attack unprovoked, and they attack for longer.
Yeah, sustained attacks. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, there's stories, people moving into bodies of water and having to stay there for hours while the bees circled.
And then when they came up, they were still there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they'll come back the next day.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so yeah, they definitely alive and well in Texas. So I've seen a lot of that. The thing is though, is that I tell my beekeepers, you're it's a manageable risk if you're actively inspecting your colonies and the temperament of your colony is good, and then you go queenless and you let them requeen themselves. You just need to watch it. So if you pay attention, you know what's going on in your hives, they requeen themselves, and then you find that the aggression is ticking up progressively over time every single time you get in, and you're letting your smoker. That's always my first question is, did you let your smoker? You're not going to have a time when your bees have been super well behaved and you come out and they're very aggressive. They didn't become Africanized overnight, right? So I think in that sense, it's a little bit blown out of proportion, and a lot of people will wave that word around when maybe they didn't like their smoker, or it was just like a one-time thing. If a raccoon is bothering a colony overnight, you come out the next day, they're going to be pretty pissed, and you're going to
Right.
feel.
And there's a difference between meeting 15 guard bees on your veil and then having your veil covered to the point where you can't see through it.
Yes,
Those are
yeah,
those
yes.
are, and
Moving
new
bees is
beekeepers are
stupid.
not good at assessing what that means. And like you said, you can't see the difference because, entomologists spent years measuring their feet, measuring their thorax, measuring their little heads, and trying to get these dimensional consistencies. That's just out the window. So it's down to the genome now.
Right.
So, and there are people, so I'm told, in Texas that keep them intentionally because they think that those are why, what are the benefits? You're a hermit, you live, a
Yeah.
half a mile from everybody, and you want to keep those hot bees. What are the benefits of keeping dangerous bees?
I mean, it's anecdotal, right? But there are guys that do that, and they will say that they're hardier, that they're bigger honey producers. But again, that's all anecdotal. I do, I do have this theory. Again, it's all anecdotal, but a lot of times we find that the most aggressive hive in a yard for a student tends to be the biggest honey producer, but they also are the biggest, right? Bigger hives
Mhm.
are more aggressive. Also, my theory is that the bigger the hive, the more challenging it is to manage them. And maybe they're just bigger honey producers because you're not getting in there messing it
Yeah,
up.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
there's for like many things with beekeeping, there's so many factors we can't control. And like with all things, something gets said and then repeated and then it's suddenly gospel. But that's what the guys, and there are a couple of guys that intentionally keep mean bees, and they'll say they're like hardier against Varroa and bigger honey producers.
And they don't worry about honeybee rustlers.
Yeah,
So nobody's taking their
true.
hives. Yeah.
That's true. Because there is that. That's a real thing.
How is climate shifting in Texas for the worse, or have you, even in the time that you've been keeping bees, are things better, worse, no difference? What's going
Yeah,
on?
it's rough. It's rough. I mean, I tell my husband often, like the one thing about the line of work that I chose is that you can't seem to escape it's depressing. It's really depressing. I'm sure there's probably therapists in school now, and there's a new like line of therapy just specifically geared towards the depression that comes with climate and the anxiety that comes with climate change. But we can't escape it because our livelihood is dependent upon it. And so, we used to, you'd be able to say exactly when a nectar flow would start and end. And now it's just seems we have more tough years than good years. Honestly, it's very hard for honey in Texas. The droughts have just gotten unbearable. We had 86 triple digit days last year,
Holy
86
cow.
triple digit days
Wow.
in Austin, Texas. We've had since July, I think we've had something like 0.06 inches of rain. So it's really tough, and that's why the agritourism and the education for us is so important because it pays the bills when the honey doesn't. And there's lots of years when the honey comes nowhere close. This year was a horrible year for honey. We had this awesome spring, tons of rain, but too much rain. We're just like any farmer, we're never happy, we're always complaining. But yeah, the weather patterns have been super erratic and they're getting more erratic, and the years are getting hotter, the summers are getting longer, and they're certainly getting drier.
So how does this impact the way you're looking at the configuration of your beehives?
Yeah.
In other words, are you considering shading? Are there, awnings for the beehives? Are you looking hard at the colors that they're painted, or are they,
My biggest concern is forage availability, honestly. And so we've adjusted. There are certain parts of Central Texas that we just not only will we not put our own production highs there, I won't, we take care of a lot of bees for folks for the ag valuation. That's a thing in Texas, and that's why a lot of beekeepers there. And we will do that for folks. And I won't even take clients in a specific area because it is defeating for me and my beekeepers to just feed bees. It's not healthy for the bees to just
right?
feed bees year round. And so we have a really hard line on we will not take on clients in specific areas because the forage is just known to be very, very poor. And I don't want to feed bees all year.
Mhm. Now, what about wasps and hornets and competing pests?
That doesn't concern me. Robbing is bad when the drought's so poor.
Yeah.
So the robbing from other colonies, we have to be so careful. And basically from like July till the end of the year, and we work bees well into November, we have to be so careful. And it's almost impossible to work a colony, in August and not get robbing started. That's other bees we have to worry about. So the beekeeper just has to be so, so careful. In terms of like wasps and things like that, I have yet to see a situation in which it really was an issue. They tend to come in with all the other robbers. I'm more concerned about my colony next door robbing out this weaker colony.
Okay, so tell me about some animal that you encountered while checking your beehives that was a big surprise to you.
I found a frog in a colony once.
What? That's not even scary.
I don't think I have. I mean, we don't have bears. I can't imagine living
Don't
in
you
a.
have tarantulas? Don't you have anything?
Yeah, I guess black widows. I get the frog was mostly just surprising. Like I opened up the top and there was this little frog, and I thought, what in the world are
What
you
kind of frog
doing
was
here?
that? Like a tree peeper or one of those
Real
frog?
small, little
Yeah.
small little froggy. But yeah, we do have black widows. So I don't wear a lot of gear. It's a comfort. Nobody gets 5 stars for like not wearing gear. It's a comfort thing because it's really hot. And those gloves just make me sweat
Mhm.
like crazy. So I don't wear a lot of gear if I can get away with it, and I usually can. But the one time I always put on gloves is when I'm moving hives because we find lots of black widows underneath the colonies. So that's probably the biggest thing. We have lots of banana spiders. People have different names for them, zipper spiders, orb weavers, lots of
I
those, and they
like you mean the
fall
big
out.
black and yellow
Mhm.
garden spiders? If
Yeah,
you
they
look at the abdomen, it looks
people
like
out.
an alien that's got its hands on its hips.
Yes,
Yeah.
they freak people out, but we have lots of those, and I just think they're really interesting. They're
Those
so
are
clever.
harmless. Those
They're
are
so
those
clever.
are your best pet ever. What about jumping spiders?
Yeah, we have the wolf spiders, and they do a lot of jumping.
No, that's wolf spiders are not jumping spiders are the little cute ones with the big eyes, the bold jumping
Oh,
spiders.
yeah, they don't
That's
bother.
okay. You're
They
not
don't
gonna
bother me.
All right. I'm
We'll
not going to
slide to
get it.
life up.
There's not one fun story in anything that you're sharing right now.
We have armadillos.
Is
I
it
thought
true that armadillos carry leprosy?
I don't know. I don't know. But you would only encounter an armadillo. They dig a lot. They're very destructive. They're like pigs. They dig up.
Now, I did hear a lot about the pigs in Texas, and that is an unsolvable problem.
Yeah, they hunt them from the air.
How is that economic? Heard
No.
about. So,
Yeah.
are you a hog hunter yourself?
No, 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 no.
Is this not somehow a potential food resource that can't they feed the poor with all these hogs or something? I
I,
mean,
I don't know. I don't. I'm
okay.
a hunter.
I'm
Shooting
putting you on the spot with
isn't my
these kinds of
forte.
questions. So, what?
I said shooting animals isn't my forte. I'm well trained on guns. Glock 19 is the sidearm of choice for the CIA. Trained on that, but no, I don't hunt.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give you a chance to tell us what you want us to know as we wrap up this interview. What would you like to share?
To about us to beekeepers or dealer's choice, whatever
It could
I
be
want.
okay. Well, I'll ask you one question first. Tell us
Okay.
one thing that other people do not know about you, a skill or a practice or an interest that you have that most people do not know.
A skill or oh, I'm a knitter.
What?
Yeah.
Didn't you just finish telling us it's too hot down there? What are you knitting?
I've knit a lot of things for a lot of babies. I picked that up in my 20s as a way to, I find it really combats my anxiety. So I didn't knit because when you start a business, you are all in. I mean, you kind of have to be. And so I didn't have any hobbies for a really long time. And then I had a little boy and I thought, I've knit for every baby in my orbit, but I haven't knit for my own child. So I picked up knitting again last year. And again, I remembered it's really great for my anxiety. It keeps you can't multitask. I can't be on my phone. I can only be right here with this knitting. So really helps with that. So I knit him a giraffe and I'm currently knitting him a hat in Texas colors, burnt orange. So been
So
working on that
now,
one for a while since June. It was supposed to be done by the time it got cold in Texas. It's still not cold in Texas, so I still have time.
so are you careful about the fibers? You seem very holistic. So in other words, are you using woolen and cotton and what, I mean, do you care about synthetic fibers? What are your knitting choices as far as the yarn that you use?
I like wool just because, it is so warm and it doesn't get stinky.
Is it as good as alpaca?
I don't know.
Okay.
But alpaca can be really expensive.
Well,
I live,
not if you
I
own
live,
the alpacas.
don't own- I can take on no more animals. We are capped. We got chickens 6 or so years
Yes,
ago, and my husband was like, no, no with the chickens. We are maxed on animals just with the bees and the two dogs alone.
but you do have chickens.
We had chickens.
Oh, you don't have them anymore.
We don't have chickens anymore. No, in 2021, 2021, we had the worst drought that we've seen in since 2011 in a decade. And all of the things that were working before to keep predators out, it was really quite sad. I mean, the wildlife was just starving to death.
Yeah.
And we kept losing chickens and I was pregnant and I was like, things hit differently when I was pregnant than they did before. And I thought, I can't do this anymore. No more chickens.
No chickens. So chickens knitting. Okay, now you can do your closing statement.
Okay. Well, I'm really proud of this book. The one thing we didn't talk about was the joy that I hope to bring, and those are through the illustration. So I just want to mention a little bit about the illustrator. Her name is Caroline Brown. Um, I found her, I was looking for a muralist for our barn at the Honey Ranch. And she came out, she did this mural, and she was like, what do you want me to paint? And I said, I would love to do scenes from a hive, but like anthropomorphize it. Let's do it. It's really fun. And I put her through beekeeping classes.
Oh, yeah, I
What
know
did
this.
you find that was interesting? And she came up with these little scenes, and actually the mural is on the dedication page, the first page of the book. That's the first piece of art that she did for us.
Also, we have this.
Oh yes, the Lord's Supper. And so I had these illustrations that were straight, right? I needed to convey information and I wanted her to do it. But all of the ones that are fun, between the bee twerking as part of the waggle dance and the Lord's
Mhm.
Supper, that is what Caroline brought to the table. And I loved it because she was new to beekeeping and she took my classes. And I said, what do you find? What is really striking you as really fun and silly? And she ran with it. And I'm really proud of the joy that we're able to bring along with the nuance. And so I want people to read this and feel empowered to go out and and be a beekeeper and learn more about your colonies. But I also want you to read this book and I want it to make you smile. So I hope that we succeed there.
That's great. So I want to thank you for the time that you gave today and for the interview. And I hope that people are inspired on many different levels because we definitely covered some ground here. It was not all about bees, which I think is very interesting to know who the people are behind the beekeeping. And I think that it's just really been fascinating to talk with you. So thanks a lot for the interview.
Thank you. This has been really fun.
And that wraps up another episode of Interviews with Experts. Please don't forget to visit the video description for links and updated information related to Two Hives Honey. And of course, I highly recommend that you obtain Tara's book, For the Bees, a handbook for happy beekeeping. If you're enjoying this series of interviews with experts, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell. I'm Frederick Dunn, and this has been The Way to Bee.